be available for on-demand viewing. You'll be notified by email when the archive is available. Now let me introduce today's speakers. Amanda Bella is Marketing Programs Manager at Bonfire. She is a strategic communications professional working in the procurement space. Omar Salame is the Executive Director of Customer Success at Bonfire. He focuses on ensuring user success for all Bonfire clients, including onboarding, training, and UI and UX analysis. Finally, Paul Brennan is our third speaker here. He is the founder of ProcurePath, a leading provider of public procurement training seminars. You can find more information about Amanda, Omar, and Paul by clicking on the speaker bio widget at the bottom of your screen. Well, that's about it for me, Amanda. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Bill, and thanks to Paul and Omar for taking the time to be with us here today as well. And also a big thank you to all of you who are joining us. We hope that you'll find today interesting and gain some key takeaways that you can then take back to your team. As you know, procurement professionals are instrumental in delivering the goods and services that cities and counties depend on to function. Increasingly, you're gaining recognition as vital contributors to your organization's strategic goals. However, while the potential for strategic contribution is high, for many teams, it's not yet a reality. We find that current skill sets and time-consuming manual processes mean that procurement teams are often forced to function in a heavily clerical role, which limits your capacity to deliver increased value. Today, we're going to be talking about how investment in procurement teams, through the right training and technology, can help teams achieve a more strategic role in achieving your organization's missions and outcomes. And most importantly, we'll talk about how procurement teams can advocate and build a business case to your organization to demonstrate potential impact and get the support you need for the resources that will help you get there. In today's webinar, we'll review the current state of investment in procurement technology and training, the importance of and ways to promote procurement internally, how to build a business case for training or investment in technology, and then we'll end off with a question and answer period where we'll be able to review any questions that you may have. So diving right in, when we look at the word strategic impact, I'm sure it's something that you often all hear a lot about, and it can be a bit of a buzzword. So we want to start today by taking a closer look at what it really means for procurement to take on a more strategic role in your organization. So Paul, maybe you can walk us through what it means when we discuss procurement strategic impact. What does that really look like, and how does it differ from this more transactional role that procurement has sometimes played in the past?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Strategic impact and really being strategic in procurement is about bringing a number of things to the table, which include process efficiencies, better contracts, increased competition, as well as cost savings. A lot of times there's a big emphasis on cost savings, but strategic impact is certainly a lot more than just cost savings. What it really boils down to are two things. One, it's being looked at as a partner and consultant by our end users and the people that we serve internally. So they want to come to procurement to help us solve their problems. And it also means becoming the go-to department for elected officials and senior administration officials. When they need something done, procurement's the go-to department to get that done. Those are really the things that I look at in terms of what makes a difference between procurement and more of a transactional approach. And more of a transactional approach is really sitting, waiting for requests to come in, and then reacting to those requests as they come in. There's not a lot of annual planning going on, and so you're sitting in a reactive mode and handling many similar type of requests throughout the year, as opposed to having procurement plans in place to kind of consolidate those needs within your internal organization and possibly with outside organizations to create better buying power. So those are some of the things that I look at in terms of the difference between a strategic and a more transactional role in procurement.
Great, and I think it's really interesting too, the point you made about wanting departments to come to procurement to help to solve their problems rather than seeing it as potentially a roadblock to things that they want. So I think that that's a great point to make as well.
Yeah, so there's a number of things that you have to look at in terms of one of the most important is becoming involved earlier in the procurement cycle. How does procurement get invited to the table when your end users are just thinking of new projects or deciding what they need, as opposed to being at the end of that process when a requisition is entered? So being involved earlier in the process is important. Developing sourcing plans on an annual basis for both your operational budgets and your capital budgets to try to see what synergies are there, to coordinate similar needs throughout your organization, to consolidate your buying power. Providing ongoing training to your end users is also very important. Many government agencies are reaching a point where each year more and more government employees, the baby boomers, are retiring. So you have a lot of new internal employees that are now being charged with interfacing with the procurement department that have never done it before. So they don't have a lot of experience in this area, and providing ongoing training is also part of being a strategic department. And then the last point I'd like to make is, in order to be involved earlier in the procurement cycle, you have to develop a relationship with your departments. And we can't develop a relationship with our internal customers by sitting in the procurement department 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year. We need to get out in the field and work in our departments, attend their staff meetings, attend their planning meetings, attend their budgeting meetings, go out and actually learn how the equipment's used. If you buy snowplows, go ride a snowplow. So we really can't be strategic if we don't have a full understanding of what our end users' needs are.
Great, very helpful point. And so other than not understanding, the different things that you're actually procuring and buying for these different departments, what would you say are some of the things that are holding teams back from making as much impact as possible? Do you find it's a lack of time or capacity?
I think it's a number of issues. One is a lack of time. Many times it's a lack of staffing. Many procurement departments lost staffing during the last economic crisis, and it's been difficult to recoup those positions. But that's more the reason why you need to look at technology and look at your internal processes to see how much manual processes you are still doing and the time that it takes to do those manual processes. A lot of double and triple entry of data through across multiple systems is very common in many procurement organizations, and that's, in my mind, it's one of the key things that you need to look at in terms of what data-driven processes do we have and how can we make them more efficient.
Great. Omar, you work with a number of different organizations and teams and clients. How have you seen ways in which technology and different types of training has helped teams achieve a greater strategic impact?
Thanks, Amanda. I mean, it kind of alludes to the same thing that was mentioned by Paul earlier. As humans, we're really good at certain things, like maybe negotiation or being able to research. And whenever technology comes in, it basically frees the modern procurement professional from having to do a lot of tasks that are, quite frankly, can be done much better by a computer, like crunching numbers and calculations, managing messaging and communication between stakeholders. So we find that once you introduce technology in, all of a sudden you have this lift. There's not much time being spent on busy work, and we have the procurement professional just focusing more on things that can move the needle. Like researching things ahead of time in an RFI, for example, seeing what the market has to offer and bringing new things to the table that maybe the internal client didn't even know about. So that's kind of one example. The other example is when we introduce technology, we typically that means we can measure the process better, and by looking at that, we can start honing in on areas that are maybe taking a little bit too long, and just honing in on the efficiency. And so by virtue of having visibility into that, you'll be able to focus more effort where they're needed most.
Fantastic. Thank you both for that insight.
Yeah, in addition, I just want to make one other point that, sometimes what's holding teams back today is that procurement's has been being asked to do more and more over the past 5 years, especially, and get involved in a lot more than we have previously. Unfortunately, training has not kept up with being asked to do more, and so in many areas, there's a gap in skill set or competencies among procurement professionals in terms of what they were asked to do previously and what they're being asked to do today. So sometimes that gap in the skill set also holds them back from really having some strategic impact.
Definitely, that's a great point. And so really just from this short discussion, we can really clearly see that the right training and the right technology support can really empower and enhance procurement teams. And some of the areas that this can help with are process efficiency. So as we mentioned, teams can spend less time on data entry and other manual tasks so that you have the greater capacity for these strategic initiatives. There's also, as Omar mentioned, greater visibility and access to data. This data can then be used to develop meaningful best practices, as well as identify areas for improvement and focus. And then finally, there's also the opportunity for more effective stakeholder relationships. So if procurement has more time, they also have more bandwidth to work more closely with end users. A great example, as Paul was saying, really going out to these departments and understanding what it is that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. You obviously need to be able to have the time in order to be able to do that. And the right training and technology can really alleviate some of the burden and allow you to do that, which will obviously create the end result of providing a greater value to the organization as a whole.
I think it's also important to remember that when we talk about efficiency of processes, there's really 3 different groups that efficiencies can affect. Certainly our end users in dealing with us, the more efficient we can make it, they're going to want to come to us and use procurement as opposed to trying to go around us. Our individual procurement departments, certainly there's a lot of efficiencies that can be gained through technology with our own departments. But we also can't forget the suppliers and how a positive effect on efficient procurement systems can help our suppliers, which normally will mean increased competition for us. Many suppliers shy away from the public procurement market just because of the old age systems that we use, paper-based systems, and the amount of time that it takes them to respond to solicitations, the investment that has to be made if they have to respond in hard copy, and so forth. So efficiencies really can improve amongst those 3 different groups that are all involved in the procurement process.
And if I could just maybe riff on that a little bit, sorry, Amanda, just a short anecdote. So we've spoken to, and maybe this is on the other side of the spectrum here, but Google's strategic sourcing group, and the way they view this, and this is very much alluding to what Paul was just mentioning, is that a strategic group, buying group at Google is basically competing with people going out there and just buying things themselves. And so the way they're competing with that is by making the process, more pleasant, easier, and that's primarily through the use of technology, such that if you're an end or a customer within Google and you want to go and buy something, the experience that you have going through the strategic sourcing team is better, more valuable than you having the freedom to go and buy yourself. And I think that same lesson can be applied to public procurement. When we have, busy engineers of the city having to lug home binders to do evaluations, instead of providing them with online tools to do their evaluations at their convenience, that's one way we can engage the stakeholder within, say, a city or municipality to want to even approach procurement in the first place.
Great. Thank you both. Those were very important and insightful comments. Definitely appreciate that. I think it really brings to light, just how important technology and introducing new ways of doing things really is and how it can be very transformative. But everyone who's on the webinar today can probably relate to the fact that actually getting the funding for these resources can sometimes be an uphill battle. There are some interesting stats that we have up on the screen now that really help to put things into perspective. So 72% of procurement teams spend less than 2% of their annual budget on training. 51% of procurement leaders do not believe that they have the capability on their team to deliver on their procurement strategy. Only 7%, which is extremely low, of procurement leaders report substantial digitization of the procurement function. And 60% of procurement teams have no tools or rely on improvised manual processes for procurement workflows. So we can really see that these stats hit home the fact that there isn't currently a major focus or investment in technology. However, it seems to really be an important need when you look at the fact that 51% of procurement leaders, which is more than half, don't believe that they can successfully deliver on their current strategy. So before we go any further, we wanted to check in with you and see how this resonates with your own experiences. So we'd like to do a quick poll. So we've placed that up on the screen. So what we're looking for is just an idea of what your organization's current approach to training is. So whether that be a formal training plan and a budget in place, no formal plan in place, and training is approved and provided on an ad hoc basis, if there's no budget or plan in place for training, or if that's just something that's not even an option that you're aware of in your current organization. We'll just give you a little bit of time to answer those poll questions. And again, we're just looking to get some insight from you to see how this resonates with your own experiences and whether you have a budget that you're working with or not currently. Alex, do we have some of the results in that we could share? All right, so it doesn't look like we have the poll results as of yet, so we may have to circle back and discuss that later. Paul, would you be able to just provide some commentary on what you normally see in organizations that you work with? Do you find there's usually a formal training plan and budget in place, or do you find it's more on an ad hoc basis?
I think a lot of organizations do try to put a formal plan together, but the big issue is getting the funding to do it. So training ends up being conducted on a very ad hoc basis because they don't have a lot of funding in place, and they have to kind of pick and choose which few educational opportunities they may be able to afford to go to. I think one of the more difficult issues is the ability for procurement organizations to try to quantify the return on investment for training, and that's a real, big issue I think procurement organizations have to work on, is in terms of documenting what return on investment they're getting for training. Our organization started a process a couple of years ago that whenever an employee goes to training, they have to come back, and there's about a page-and-a-half questionnaire that they have to fill out in terms of what they learned, what are the benefits of the training. Certainly networking is one of the benefits of going to training, because you develop a networking structure that you can then rely on when you have questions on something you haven't done before, or you want to get more information from people that may have more experience in a particular subject matter than you do. So I find most procurement agencies want to have a very formal training plan, but aligning a budget to go with that training plan is usually the hurdle. And how do you document the return on investment for that? One of the things that you can do is to certainly, have employees fill out a little synopsis of what they learned by going to the training, but then, make sure the employees come back to you and tell you when they've used it. all right? Hey, I learned this, 6 months ago at a training event. I was just able to use what I learned on this particular procurement, and this was the result. And you want to take snapshots of those, because those winning moments you need to capture and be able to report on those, especially up the chain to those that provide the funding, so you can provide a link to training and to successful outcomes. And so it's very important to have some way to track what's been provided in training and if employees have been able to actually implement that in the workplace.
Definitely. I think that's a really great point about tracking when you use these key learnings. And I'm sure that happens very often, but we don't always all think about actually jotting that down and communicating that up the chain so that we can have more of these types of opportunities.
Yeah, it's also important to track your networking, when you've been able to use that networking group that you've developed from going to training to help you. Hey, I was able to get specifications from a different agency from someone that I met. It saved me 4 hours from developing, my own specification from scratch. Those are the type of things that you want to document, so when you ask for training again, you can give real life examples of, we went to training and these were the benefits that we actually saw.
That's a really great point, and I think that's something that we sometimes forget about, is just how important it is to have that network and how that can be so meaningful and really save time and provide different opportunities and different ways of doing things. That's great. So, Paul, another question for you. Why do you think that procurement teams are often hearing no when they make the request for resources? Do you think it's just, as you mentioned, that the team isn't putting forward enough of a case of what the ROI will be? What do you think is the major obstacle there that people need help overcoming?
In many organizations, the major obstacle, and this is where procurement really needs to take a look at themselves, in many organizations, the main problem is that our elected officials really don't understand what we do. And they don't understand the complexity of what we do. For some elected officials, they look at procurement, we're buying copy paper and paper clips and things of that nature. So that's usually the first hurdle, is how do we educate our elected officials of the importance of what we do, but also the complexity of what we're involved with, from major equipment purchases to IT purchases to managing grant compliance in terms of procurements, MWBE compliance, and things of that nature. So that's really the first part in terms of educating them in terms of what we do.
And when it comes to that, what would you say would be the best way to do that, or some ways that you've successfully done that in the past?
We found the best way is that we issue a monthly report to our elected officials, which really provides a snapshot of all the solicitations that we do on a monthly basis. It starts off with a paragraph of notable achievements by bullet point. So anything that major occurrences or major achievements, from contract savings or new contracts that have strategic significance to the organization, those are all put in bullet form in the beginning of the report. And then we list all the solicitations that were involved in every stage. So we start off with the solicitations that were issued during the month, then a section of solicitations that were open during the month, solicitations that were awarded during the month. And I feel that's important because when a procurement organization does that, it becomes quite evident of the depth of what we're involved with in the organization, but also the balancing act that we deal with on a daily basis of managing multiple, and certainly the bigger organization, the more you have, but certainly managing 10, 20, 30, 40 procurements all at the same time, all in different stages of the process. We started doing that about a year ago, and it really opened our elected officials' eyes to really what goes on in procurement on a given month, and the volume that comes through procurement, and also the strategic value of what we add to the organization.
That's fantastic. I can see how that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, we can't change the way elected officials and our end users look at what we do if we are not out there reporting on it and promoting what we do.
Definitely. And Omar, have you heard similar stories from clients when they are making requests for resources? Do you hear that they're often having a difficult time?
Yeah, this is common across the board. Back to your original question of why is it important to promote procurement? I can speak as a citizen, even before being involved with public procurement teams. I'll admit I didn't know about the function and its importance, but over the last 7 years, working with over 200 procurement teams across U.S. and Canada, I can now clearly attest to how crucial a function is just for the society at large. Whether it's building roads, maintaining hospitals, coordinating relief efforts. Procurement ultimately is a method by which we're spending taxpayer money to improve people's lives. And I think that connection is often missed on the public and by extension, elected officials as well. And so to me, it's making that connection is how you can start to, gain a little bit more of, the kind of stature that you need within the organization. Consider, for example, that with OECD countries, I think it's about 11 or 12% of GDP is spent by public procurement. And that's a lot of money, right? And so that connection, again, I feel like is missed. What I've seen others do, I think we have a client who mentioned that part of their intranet kind of newsletter that they issue, they kind of, every once in a while, they have a story about, how the procurement department was able to procure, a piece of equipment for a way better price through like their negotiation or the research that they've done, just to kind of reinforce that message. So I think kind of what Paul mentioned earlier, just kind of putting the spotlight more on the function, moving it away from more of a transactional, we're making you follow the process, and replacing that message with more of we provide this value for the organization. And, if we're talking about cities and municipalities, by extension to the resident and the taxpayer.
Yeah, it really sounds like communication is very key and not being shy about promoting these wins that the team has been able to create. So I think that's very important for people to take that away and possibly start thinking about doing that if they aren't already.
I agree with what Omar said. Also, I wanted to bring up one other point is that, one of the reasons why, or a number of reasons why procurement teams often hear no is that there's 7 basic problems that have been identified that most procurement organizations probably have had at some point. All of them may have some or 1 or 2 of these, but the idea is to make sure that you don't have problems in any of these areas, and that's how you get to being strategic and being able to get the resources that you need. And those, procurement's problems that organizations have to look at themselves, saying which problems do we have. Those are lack of acceptance, lack of strategies, lack of methods, and technology certainly falls in under methods. Do you have the proper tools in order to be strategic? Lack of trust. Do your customers trust you in order to come to you to save time and to help them get good solutions? Do your elected officials trust the procurement department? Lack of know-how. We talked before about how the competencies for public procurement have changed. Lack of competence. Unfortunately, there are some procurement organizations that have a lack of competence, and certainly it's hard to get resources if people view the organization that way. And the other one is lack of recognition. You're not getting any recognition. So procurement organizations really need to look at those 7 problems and say, which ones do I have and which ones do we need to work on to help us be more strategic. And then as you solve those problems, it should be easy to turn getting told no to getting yes.
Fantastic. It sounds like that's a great starting point and a good way to level set and kind of see where you're starting off and what it is that you need to do. Do you find that when you're doing this internal promotion that you need to adjust the message for different stakeholders, or when you're providing that example, going out to elected officials, are there other ways that you need to promote yourself internally to other departments, or do you find that there's this one message that you can put out there that helps you to promote the department?
No, you definitely have to look at the different stakeholder groups. There's basically 4 target customer audiences that procurement has, and they all have different needs from procurement. And you have to understand what those needs are from each of those customer groups. And you want to target different messages to each of those target markets. NIGP has a class on marketing the procurement function where it really goes into detail on this. But it's definitely, you can't have, certainly there may be some messages that you need to get across to all of the different target audiences. But for most part, you're going to need to have different messages for each of those target audiences. Because they all have different needs, and you may be seen differently by each of those target audiences. So it's important to understand how each of those target audiences views procurement as well.
Definitely, great. And just to recap, would you be able to repeat? Oh, sorry, Omar, go ahead.
Yeah, so if I could just add on to that, if we look at the different target audiences, maybe I'll just speak to the elected officials and those who kind of listen to the public. I think as a long-term goal, if we can just start working on tying the procurement function to effective spend of public monies, I mean, that to me is the key thing. Tax is always a hot topic issue in every election. And a way you do that, I think, and I've seen that done, again, with some of the teams I've been working with, is by increasing the transparency and making the public see that this is an open, fair, transparent process that we're running. For example, sharing the award notifications online, showing that you've actually had multiple suppliers compete for this contract. All of that is a trust-building exercise between the procurement function and the public, which will then, in turn, get the attention of the elected official. On the internal stakeholders, I think, again, from the anecdotes that I've heard, you'll have someone who maybe was at a trade show and saw a piece of equipment, came back to the procurement department asking, can we just buy this? And through the process of research, the procurement department was able to show that, no, there's actually, better priced, better equipment that you can buy. But the fact that they've gone through this procurement process now that they've discovered this, and it's kind of changing one mind at a time there by just providing that experience and showing that depth of knowledge that procurement teams have. And so the messaging, I see it more as a long-term thing as well, especially by changing the way procurement is being viewed publicly. And once you have that done, it will kind of translate back to the elected officials anyway.
Fantastic. So when we're making the case for training and what sort of training or technology should be pursued, you talked about this a little bit earlier, Paul, when you were talking about the key competencies. Would you be able to walk us through that a little bit more and how to kind of assess where your organization is and how to move forward and decide which key competencies to focus on?
Sure. In developing a training plan, if you're involved in public procurement, you should hopefully be aware that there's been a new public procurement key competencies matrix that's been developed by Public Spend Forum with input from NIGP, NASPO, and other organizations to really identify the competencies needed by the public procurement workforce going forward. That information is available on Public Spend Forum's website, as well as some other stakeholders' websites. But if you haven't taken a look at that, you really should take a look at that in terms of what the key competency areas that have been identified. And then you really need to look at your organization employee by employee. Not every competency is going to apply to every employee. Depends upon their role and their level within your organization. So that's the first thing you'd want to do is look at the roles in your organization and determine which competencies apply to those roles, whether they're a senior executive or entry-level buyer. And then you need to look at each individual person and say, all right, there's 10 competencies that really fall under this particular role. How do the people stack up that I currently have in those roles? Where are the gaps? Where do I need training going forward to make sure we have a workforce that is properly trained going forward? So that's really the key thing. The first step is to look internally at yourselves. Look at this competency model, which really I think is very well done in terms of spelling out the new competencies that are required, and then do a gap analysis to see exactly where the holes are that you need to plug and what type of training your organization needs.
Great. And you also had mentioned, I believe a little bit earlier, that competencies, have changed as procurement roles have changed. Would you be able to walk us through that a little bit and what you see as some of those core key competencies being in your organization or other organizations you've worked at?
Sure. There's a lot of different areas. Years ago, public procurement was primarily done by low bid contract awards, very little negotiations. Best value procurement started to take hold about 15 years ago, and certainly has increased very, very much across the country. So we're not awarding strictly by low bid anymore. So, particular skills in terms of negotiations are certainly much more important than they used to be. Procurement's being looked at to do more contract management and administration. So certainly contract management and administration skills are becoming much more important. Risk analysis is also becoming more and more important in terms of looking at your contracts in terms of risk management. So those are a few areas. And just, general soft skills like problem solving and critical thinking. Those are skills that we normally wouldn't find in a procurement job specification going back 10 or 15 years. But in today's world, those particular skills are very much needed. Writing skills also are very important. You didn't find a lot in job descriptions in terms of being able to write and communication skills. Even more importantly are presentation skills. Procurement's being asked more and more to get up and make presentations, whether it's in front of our governing boards or to supplier communities and so forth. So having the ability to get up and do public speaking and making presentations is also very important.
Great. Definitely a lot of important things in the role there that it sounds like perhaps organizations aren't necessarily always thinking about and looking forward to needing those types of people to bring on. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I would say. So many organizations are stuck with their old job descriptions, and they don't get updated that often. There are a number of counties and cities in the country that have already adopted these new competencies and are currently revising all their job specifications. So their procurement job specifications will be based upon these new competencies that have been identified.
Great. So when we're looking at the essential elements of a training plan, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, Paul, but if you could maybe do a little bit of a deeper dive, how do you find the best way to frame the benefits of a workshop, a seminar, a conference to really show that positive impact to your organization? You touched on a couple of items, but if you could just walk us through that a little bit more in depth, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Well, I think in terms of putting a training plan together, there's a lot of training opportunities that are out there. There are many that are free, like the webinar we're on now, as well as many training that also cost registration fees and possibly travel as well, depending upon where it may be located. But what I normally do is to look at what are the needs, what's available to fulfill those needs. I find in talking to elected officials a lot that asking money for training classes, whether it's on site or at another location, sometimes is viewed more favorably than conferences. For whatever reason, conferences in elected officials' mind or administrators' mind may not have as formal type of view of training. But conferences also play a very important role because conferences provide great networking opportunity to meet other professionals in your area or in your particular specialty, whatever your agency does. So I try to look at working on a plan for an employee or a person that kind of combines some webinars, which are certainly accessible from a number of organizations, and then looking at what the gaps are, and then determine whether the best fit for those gaps is going to a 1-day, 2-day, 3-day classes or a series of those type of classes, okay, or is a more general conference type of agenda more important, where they'll get less formal training, but they may be able to get training on a number of subjects in a short time period. So it's really a combination of both, and you have to look at within your agency if there's a preference within your agency of sending employees to classes as opposed to conferences, and then kind of work within that parameters that you know are within your organization.
Great, and it definitely sounds like the way it's framed is very important as well. Like you said, highlighting the value of conferences and that networking, which, the elected officials or whoever it is that you're bringing the ask to might not realize and might not be aware of.
Yeah, and it's important too is that it helps sometimes to identify the class you want to go to, and that the instructor is a very good instructor, has very good experience. Well, highlight that in your request too. I want to go to this class that's being given by a certain instructor, and this is their background, and this is their experience, because that all highlights the value of the class.
Definitely. Sounds like the more detail, the better.
Yes.
Great. So before we talk a little bit more about the technology side of things, we were going to do a quick poll, but it seems that we're having some technical difficulties on that. So looking here, there's a lot of different types of procurement software that people are using, if they're using any. So we find some organizations and municipalities are using online bidding software, or a mixture of bid and RFP evaluation software, an ERP or a P2P system, a mixture of all these different tools kind of cobbled together, or no software at all and are still in that manual process, running things through, paper and printing and binders and all of those sorts of things. So Omar, although we don't have the answers to what our audience is typically using, would you be able to provide some insight on what a lot of clients are transitioning from before they begin implementing the bonfire system? What are you finding that they're transitioning from, and what are some of the pain points with that for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the vast majority are coming from using maybe their website to post opportunities for suppliers, but doing the rest of the, at least strategic sourcing process completely offline, which means the majority of organizations that I've come across are using or accepting paper submissions and in multiple envelopes. They're not relying on software to do the evaluation, to disseminate the packages to the evaluation committee members. Instead, they're relying on packaging, binders and envelopes and kind of sending them physically to evaluators to evaluate. I would say that's where we're sitting today. I think the good news, though, is I've definitely seen a shift over the last 7 years in terms of both appetite and comfort in teams, specifically in the cities and municipal space, to be more open towards, at least accepting online submissions, and more so on on running the entire evaluation online. And I think that's part of that is I think there's just a general comfort with technology that we're seeing. As everybody's kind of using Facebook and they can upload pictures and things like that, the experience of a supplier uploading a PDF document or an Excel document is not much different than that. And so there's a bit of a comfort that we've, as society, all developed, which kind of is maybe putting a little bit of pressure on procurement departments to catch up to where the expectation is, at least in terms of the process. But yeah, no, in general, it's still mainly offline.
All right. Well, it's great to hear that that's possibly something that's going to be changing in the future so that we can be a little bit more strategic, which sounds great. So similar to any other investment, it's really key to show the benefit that a technology investment will have on organizational outcomes. Paul, when it comes to bringing on technology, where do you find that technology can have the greatest impact for procurement teams? What's been your experience in seeing the biggest shift and the biggest thing that teams are experiencing after bringing on a technology solution?
Well, I find the biggest benefit is the reduction of a lot of manual processes or clerical type of processes. Depending upon where your organization is with technology, almost every procurement job has some level of clerical type of function to it. We all deal with a lot of paper and forms that we have to receive and things of that nature. However, as a procurement manager or executive, I sit there and try to break down these processes because I say to myself, do I want to pay a buyer's salary to do that clerical type of work, or do I want to automate that through the use of technology or help separate out the process so a clerical function is doing it as opposed to a buyer doing it? I want to free up my buyer's time to spend more time questioning, finding out more information about the market and the industry so we can put more strategic and better contracts in place. So I think that the main thing is reducing a lot of the repetitive manual type of work. And it goes beyond just the buyer that's involved, because the more paper that we used to receive, when the buyer's done with it, then someone else has to be involved of where does that paper go? Where does that paper get filed? So I think that, the main thing we want to look at is how we can reduce those repetitive manual work that we have to do and automate that is really the big benefit. And you also have to remember that the benefit, Omar mentioned this before, the benefit's not just for procurement, it's for our end users too. So when we automate the RFP evaluation process, it makes it a lot easier for our end users to be able to evaluate proposals. Our organization firmly supports telecommuting for employees that are currently on an evaluation team, so they can stay out of the office and they have access to everything that they need to have online, and they can read and evaluate the proposals normally much faster because they're not being interrupted being in their office. So it's not just the procurement staff in terms of automating, it's making it easier for the end users to have access to the documents, and it also speeds up the evaluation process as well.
Great. Omar, is that similar to what you've seen in terms of areas of greatest impact when you're speaking with clients?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of tasks that we see, from managing communication with suppliers to, again, packaging those documents up and sending them to the evaluation committees. Things that would take, I would say, maybe half an hour to an hour per project will be, without exaggeration, instantaneous when you're using a system that's built to kind of help you with that process. The other thing I think to mention, there is also this peace of mind that you get. And what I mean by that is, a lot of these tasks that we find procurement professionals doing are being done just to document and audit proof the process, stamping things, time stamping things, storing, all of that you get for quote unquote for free with a digital systems, because just the nature of digital systems is all the steps are being documented and timestamped as you go. And then you have the byproduct of being able to push a button and produce a report. Back to Paul's comment about, paying for a buyer's salary to do something clerical. I have heard many stories in which there are, people spending many, many hours a week pulling together scoring summaries and reports. And again, a digital platform can do this for you in an instant. So I would definitely echo what Paul mentioned. But also there's an element of peace of mind because the system is documenting everything for you as well.
Just to give you a real life example on in terms of the speed of being able to make contract decisions. I just opened up a bid yesterday for laptops, and it was an electronic bidding event. Going back to the old way we used to do things, we would have got in, I think I got 6 responses to it. I would have got 6 hard copy responses. Someone would have had to take that and put all the numbers into an Excel spreadsheet. Then we'd most likely identify calculation errors that the companies made when they put in their manual paper bid sheets. And it would take, a half hour, an hour, depending upon how long the procurement was, to put all that data into a spreadsheet. Compare that to an electronic bidding event, is that you open the documents, which takes about 30 seconds to go through the opening process and unseal the documents. And then you basically, click 3 buttons and you have your analysis spreadsheet right in front of you, okay? Within a minute of when you've opened the solicitation, you have the analysis spreadsheet in front of you that shows all the vendors' pricings, line item by total, and you can look at it, depending upon how you were going to award it. But you will have all that data within a minute of when you open a solicitation, compared to looking at an hour and a half, whatever it may be, depending upon the time of the solicitation.
That's fantastic. That's a great example. Thank you for walking us through that. It's always nice to hear some real life examples. So finally, before we turn it over to questions, my last question for you, Paul, is when building a business case to management, what are some of the major considerations and items that procurement teams should include and keep in mind when they're trying to access new technology and bring something in that will help with the bid process?
Well, looking at trying to document what you think the return on investment is, that's normally the hardest thing to do in terms of, all right, I'm going to get this technology, I'm going to save time. One of the big questions that elected officials, first ask is, okay, how many positions can I cut? And it's not necessarily the point of implementing the technology is to automatically turn around and cut positions. It's to be able to give you the time to be more strategic on that you don't have the time to do now, in terms of, I call it, getting in the weeds of different procurements, and really understanding the needs, the market, and so forth, which ends up with better contract outcomes. So that's really one of the toughest things to try to get across. Some of the other things to take into consideration is that many organizations may already have an ERP, and while big ERPs try to be everything to everybody in terms of handling procurement, handling finances, handling budget, handling HR, most of the time they're not best of breed, and they may not offer the latest technology. But keep in mind that since we're in a hosted software environment today, that you really need to look at what you're paying for your maintenance if you're running an ERP procurement system, what you're paying for maintenance on the different modules, because you may be able to go out and get a new best-of-breed type of procurement solution for actually less money than what you're paying on maintenance on your current systems. It's much easier today to have a separate procurement system that feeds into an ERP system. So the technology today makes it much easier for different systems to talk to each other. So certainly that's something else that you need to understand, and you can make your case for it. Because a lot of times you may ask, and they'll say, well, no, you have to use the main ERP system. Well, in today's world, that's rapidly changing. The newer systems can all talk back and forth much easier than they have had to do in the past. But you really need to try to concentrate on how much time it takes you to do certain things. And sometimes it's doing time studies on the time that's involved with your manual processes, and then you can try to show the return on investment by freeing up that time.
Great. Thank you so much for walking us through that. So we'll close here so that we have a couple minutes to get to any questions that may have come in. And we just wanted to put these quick stats up on the slide just to show the incredible impact that procurement can make. You can see by these statistics that there is obviously a lot of money, as we all know, flowing through procurement teams. And there's really a huge impact to be made on the lives of the public, as we've mentioned a couple times through this presentation. So it's really important to communicate and impress upon whether it be elected officials or whoever it is that you're working with, the importance of this, and to advocate and promote your own profession. So with that being said, we'll turn it over to any questions that anyone may have and try to get all of those answered before we get to the top of the hour.
Thank you, Amanda. This is Bill again. There's time, if you have another question or two, go ahead and submit them. And know that if we don't get to your question, that you will get an individual response back. So first question here is, Paul, your opening comments mentioned 4 areas of strategic focus: process efficiencies, cost savings, increased competition, and what was the last one?
The last one is better contracts. So certainly that's the goal of strategic. Being more strategic is to have better contracts in place.
Gotcha. Okay. Got a couple more questions here as we head up to the end of the hour here. This question relates to technology. How can technology transform the procurement landscape? And I open that up to either you, Paul, or Omar.
Maybe I'll take a stab at it first. Well, on one hand, I think Paul had a lot of great points about just making things more efficient, making the experience for the internal user better as well, such that they actually want to deal with the procurement department. I see also another thing there is, as we have more and more organizations digitize their procurement process, there's another layer of sophistication, I guess, you could unlock by having this data all live in the cloud that could promote for better collaboration among neighboring cities, for example. Things that we haven't even thought about yet, maybe, or have seen happen in public procurement, can happen as we make that shift in technology. And I would say the only way to kind of maybe have a similar example that we can all relate to is when you open your phone and you check the traffic conditions, and you can see a live view in any city in the world for what the traffic conditions are like. And the only reason we know that is because almost everybody has a smartphone in their pocket now. And so some of those can be applied to procurement in ways that we can, make procurement, again, more connected among colleagues, share some insights, share some data, and the wisdom of the crowd, so to speak.
Great. This is a good question. How can I effectively judge where my team's weaknesses lie? Again, for either you or Paul, it's a good question to ask in almost any circumstance.
Well, one of the things that I think is a good process to do is to review that competency model with your employees, and let them do their own self-assessment of where they feel their skills are within those competencies. And then management does their assessment of each employee, and then you sit down and kind of compare them. And that starts a good discussion point with each employee in terms of, where those gaps may be, Certainly, I think the self-assessment by the procurement employees against those new competencies is very important. Makes them think a lot in terms of how the job has changed. But they're normally pretty honest in terms of saying, hey, I think I need more training in this particular area. So that's the first step that I would do.
All right. Omar, anything you would like to add?
No, actually, Paul covered it really well there.
Good deal. All right. Well, listen, we have run out of time, and it's right at the top of the hour, so I'd like to thank our speakers, Amanda, Omar, and Paul, for doing an excellent job. We'd also like to thank Bonfire for making this webinar possible. Again, if we didn't answer your questions, the speakers will respond to you personally. As a reminder, you will receive a follow-up email that will include a link to view a recording of today's presentation. So if you found this event useful, please share it with your colleagues. At the end of this webinar, in a few seconds, a short survey will pop up in your browser window. We would appreciate it if you share your feedback on this event and help us provide the most interesting and useful content for you. Finally, all of us would like to thank you for your time. This is Bill Wolfen, and we look forward to seeing you at the next American City and County webinar.